I was at my son's soccer game the other day, and I was sitting next to my friend Alex, whose son is on the opposite team, who, by the way, crushed us 7-2. It was terrible. Anyway, so I'm watching the soccer game, and I'm talking to Alex, and it's not a super compelling soccer game because they're 10-year-olds, but we were talking, and I said, when I was younger, I was pretty nerdy. And he goes like, when you were younger? And to be honest with you, he's totally right. Like, I have a degree in math. I was an engineer, and I'm an Episcopal priest. I am pretty much whatever the opposite of cool is. But being a nerdy kind of fella these days is seen as sort of a positive thing. Nerdy people are useful. They can do all the technology and stuff. Don't ask me to help you with your phone. But being nerdy is like a kind of a positive thing. But when I was younger, being nerdy was definitely not a positive thing. And so as a young person, I kind of didn't always fit in, with the in crowd or whatever. And I had my friends, in the chess club and the math club, but we weren't like, the prom kings or anything like that. So I was always kind of felt myself as something of an outsider, that I didn't really like people all that much, because as the reading from James tells us, that the words that we use can sometimes be very hurtful, right? We've probably, all of us, most of us grew up with the phrase, sticks and stones can hurt your bones, but words can never hurt me or break your bones. But I don't think that's true. I've not broken a lot of bones. I've only broken my fingers. I've broken all of these fingers. This is the one that's left. And but the things that people said to me, even when I was quite young, they still sort of resonate sometimes, and they still can kind of come back up, and they can still be hurtful to contemplate. And so I spent a lot of my time as a young person feeling sort of not really connected with people in a lot of ways, and kind of taking in a lot of these negative things that I had heard as a young person. And when I was in my early 30s, I was about 30 or 31, I started going to church like regularly. I've told the story that I went to church on Christmas Eve for like 10 or 12 years before I decided I would check out that Easter thing as well. I heard it's cool. It is. I hope you come back. And then I started going to church kind of regularly, and I was really fortunate. I was in Portland, Oregon, and I started going to this church called St. Michael and All Angels, which was a big church in those days. I think it's still a pretty big church. And they had this program for people who wanted to become baptized. And it was actually it was very demanding. You had to go for 2 hours every Sunday for like 6 months to this class. And I had like a sponsor, a wonderful man named Michael. And, you learned all about the faith. And at the end of it, if you had, been there enough, we were baptized on the vigil of Easter. And then we were confirmed later on Pentecost. So one of the real insights that I had in this process of becoming a Christian, of learning enough to really sort of function in the world as a Christian, is that I actually liked people. I just didn't like people who were mean. And I think probably a lot of us have had experiences like that, where we, as we grow up, we kind of discover our people. Right? And I think church is one of the wonderfulest places to encounter your people. Because ideally, the church is a place where everyone is welcome. I think it even probably have it on a sign somewhere, like all are welcome, right? Although really like mean and hateful people, they're welcome, but we would really like them to change and not be mean and hateful people. But churches is this wonderful place and community where we can encounter the other and learn to be sort of vulnerable with each other. That you can be your nerdy self or your cool self and be accepted and loved as you are. And I think that's like really, really important. It's an important function that the church has. Aside from its work in continuing the mission and ministry of Jesus, its other really important function is as a place where people can come and be themselves and know the love of God in the fellowship with one another. And we read in this gospel story today where Jesus is telling the disciples basically what's going to be happening, and in a very disciple-like way, they don't like it, and they don't quite understand what Jesus is up to. And Peter, who, he wants to protect Jesus. He loves Jesus. He doesn't want Jesus to get hurt. He certainly doesn't want to hear this talk of Jesus getting killed. And so he says, Jesus, you can't be talking like that. It'll turn people off. And Jesus tells them, you're seeing this all wrong. And then he has this wonderful thing about how we are called to take up our cross and follow him. If we really want to be like Jesus, if we really want to be following his footsteps, we, like he, will have to take up our cross, right? We have to pick up those burdens and those hurt words and carry that stuff with us and be brave and courageous. At the end of every church service, we end with a prayer to give us courage to go out into the world and to love the way that Jesus did, because it takes courage to love like that. But, I was thinking when Jesus tells us in this passage that we are called to pick up our cross and follow him, if we think about the story in Jerusalem in Jesus' final day, as Jesus goes from being flogged and tortured in the palace where Pontius Pilate is, and where he's been tormented and stripped of his clothing and whipped and put a crown of thorns on him, and he begins that final walk, that last mile to Calvary with that cross on his back. Jesus doesn't carry his cross by himself. That the story tells us that Jesus, straining under the cross and under the weight of what they have done to him, they pluck a stranger out of the crowd, Simon of Cyrene, and they force him to carry the cross with Jesus. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, that even Jesus doesn't expect to carry his cross by himself. That although we are asked by him to, if we want to be his followers, that we must pick up our cross and walk, there is not the expectation that we have to do that all alone. We are not in this faith thing all by ourselves. That we are called to be a community, a people who work together to hold each other up, to give us strength when we feel weak, to give us courage when we are afraid, to be there to help us carry our crosses. And that is the great gift that Jesus has given us, is that when Jesus ascended to be with his Father, what he left behind was a community, a group of people forged in the trials and tribulations of Jesus' last days, who had been with him for months and years and learned his words and seen them acted out in that week of passion, who then held each other up, who held together and went forth into the world to every corner of the Roman Empire and beyond to share this amazing possibility that you can be in a community with people and be loved and known and accepted, that you are enough, just as you are. You don't have to follow a particularly rigorous, way of life. You just have to be willing to walk with others, to join together in the community of God's people, and to recognize that the circle of God's people has no limit, that everyone is invited, not just the best people or the good people or the righteous people, but even the crappy people. We all know who they are. Some of us see them in the mirror every day. That everybody is welcome and loved. That is our mission as a community of faith, to welcome and love and allow people to be vulnerable with us so they may discover their true gifts and strengths, that they too can participate with us and to bring their person, their ability, their identity into this wonderful thing that we call church, so that we together can carry each other's crosses into the promised land. Amen.